Hello there, how are you? Feeling a bit restless? Mind buzzing like a Victorian lady's hat full of bees? Well, you've come to the right place. Tonight, we're going to take a slow, sleepy stroll through the utterly absurd, delightfully delicate, and occasionally eyebrow-raising world of Victorian dating. Yes, dating, but not the kind with texting and tacos. No, this was the age of handwritten letters, painfully polite glances, and courtship so slow you could knit an entire scarf between flirtations. If you've ever thought modern dating was confusing, just wait until you hear about the rules involving gloves, calling cards, and how not to faint during a waltz. So tuck yourself in, fluff your pillow, pretend you're wearing a corset, but not too tight. We're here to relax, not collapse. Let your eyelids grow heavy as we unravel the romantic rituals of a time when love was whispered, not tweeted, and every sigh had a social consequence. This is not just history, this is sleepy history, with a wink and a yawn, and possibly a fainting couch. Ready? Let's begin. In the Victorian era, romance didn't begin with a pickup line, it began with a glance. A very specific kind of glance, not too long, not too short, just long enough to suggest interest, but not so long that someone's aunt would faint from scandal. You see, in the 1800s, eye contact was practically a declaration of intent. A gentleman might catch sight of a young lady across the ballroom. He would not wave, he would not wink, he would not shout, "Hey, you," across the string quartet. No, he would simply look softly, respectfully, with the kind of gaze that said, "I admire your bonnet and would like to discuss the weather with you in a supervised setting." The lady, in turn, might glance back, briefly, then look away, then glance again. This was the dance before the dance, the flirtation before the conversation, the prelude to a possible courtship that may or may not involve a chaperoned walk near some hedges. But beware, too much eye contact could be dangerous. A prolonged gaze might suggest impropriety, or worse, boldness, and boldness was the enemy of Victorian romance. One did not simply stare, one glanced, one fluttered, one looked away dramatically, as if overcome by the sheer emotional weight of being admired. There were rules, of course, there were always rules. A gentleman must never look at a lady in a way that suggested anything other than pure, unadulterated admiration for her moral character and embroidery skills. A lady must never look at a gentleman in a way that suggested she had thoughts, especially romantic ones. Thoughts were dangerous. Thoughts led to feelings. Feelings led to fainting, and fainting led to scandal. So, they glanced, and they glanced again, and sometimes, if the stars aligned and the chaperone was distracted by a tray of biscuits, they might even smile. Just a little, just enough to say, "I see you. I like your cravat. Let's talk about flowers sometime." And that, dear dreamer, was how love began. Not with words, not with touch, but with a glance. A fleeting, fluttering, socially acceptable glance. So, as you drift off tonight, imagine yourself in a grand ballroom. The chandeliers sparkle, the violins hum. You stand near a potted fern, pretending not to look, and across the room, someone glances back, just once, just enough. Sleep well. The eyes have spoken. In the modern world, expressing romantic interest might involve a text, a meme, or a suspiciously well-timed accidental like on someone's 2017 vacation photo. But in the Victorian era, it was all about the calling card. Ah yes, the calling card. A small, stiff rectangle of paper, usually cream-colored, always elegant, bearing the gentleman's name in the most refined script imaginable. No hashtags, just pure, unadulterated formality. If a gentleman fancied a lady, he didn't send flowers, he didn't send chocolates, he sent paper. But not just any paper. This was the paper. The paper that said, "I am interested in possibly visiting your home, sitting in your parlor, and discussing the weather while your aunt watches us like a hawk." The process was delicate. The gentleman would arrive at the lady's residence, but he would not knock, he would not ring, he would not shout, "Yo," from the street. No, he would hand his calling card to the butler, or the maid, or whoever was unlucky enough to answer the door. And then he would leave, immediately, like a romantic ninja. The lady, upon receiving the card, would inspect it carefully. Was the name spelled correctly? Was the font sufficiently elegant? Was the paper thick enough to suggest good breeding, but not so thick as to suggest arrogance? These were important questions. If she approved, she might respond. Not directly, of course. That would be too forward. She would send word through her parents, or her governess, or a carrier pigeon trained in etiquette. And if all went well, the gentleman would be invited to call. But calling didn't mean chatting. It meant sitting, in a chair, in a parlor, with a chaperone, possibly sipping tea, possibly complimenting the curtains, possibly wondering if he was allowed to blink. The lady, meanwhile, would be equally restrained. She might smile. She might nod. She might say something thrilling like, "Yes, the weather has been quite mild." And the gentleman would respond with something equally electrifying, like, "Indeed, quite mild." This was romance. This was courtship. This was the slow, cautious, paper-based dance of Victorian love. So, as you drift off tonight, imagine yourself as a calling card, elegant, mysterious, full of potential. You rest quietly on a silver tray, waiting to be noticed. And somewhere, someone is wondering if your font is romantic enough. Sleep well. The paper has spoken. Imagine this. You're finally sitting across from the person who makes your heart flutter like a lace-trimmed fan in a summer breeze. You've rehearsed your compliments. You've memorized your weather facts. You're ready to say something daring, like, "I admire your taste in upholstery." And then there she is, the chaperone, sitting 3 feet away, knitting, watching, judging, breathing loudly. Welcome to Victorian dating, where romance was never a party of two. Chaperones were the unsung heroes or villains, depending on your perspective of 19th century courtship. Their job, to ensure that no one got too flirty, too close, or too emotionally expressive. In other words, they were professional vibe. Typically, the chaperone was a mother, an aunt, or a governess with the emotional range of a doily. She would sit nearby, pretending to be engrossed in her needlework, but in reality, she was listening to every syllable, every sigh, every scandalous mention of feelings. If a gentleman leaned in too far, she cleared her throat. If a lady laughed too freely, she adjusted her shawl with judgmental flair. If someone dared to mention poetry, she blinked slowly, as if to say, "Not on my watch." Chaperones were everywhere, on walks, in carriages, at picnics. They were like romantic lifeguards, constantly scanning for signs of emotional drowning. And heaven forbid a couple be left alone in a room. That was the stuff of Victorian horror novels. But here's the twist. Chaperones weren't just obstacles. Sometimes they were secret allies. A well-placed aunt might accidentally fall asleep during a visit. A sympathetic governess might suddenly remember she had to check on the ER. And in those brief, glorious moments, love could bloom quietly, cautiously, and always within the bounds of propriety. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine yourself on a garden stroll. The roses are blooming, the birds are singing, and behind you, a chaperone is walking exactly 3 paces behind, humming disapprovingly. You glance at your beloved, they glance back, and somewhere between the sighs and the supervision, romance tiptoes in. Sleep well. The chaperone is watching, but she's also very sleepy. How to flirt using teacups, sofas, and the strategic placement of doilies. Welcome to the drawing room, the sacred stage of Victorian courtship. A place where love tiptoed in wearing polished boots and a stiff collar, where flirtation was performed with the grace of a ballet and the caution of a chess match, and where every cushion, curtain, and cup of tea had a role to play. In the Victorian era, the drawing room was not just a room, it was the room, the arena of romance, the theatre of polite emotional warfare. It was where suitors were received, reputations were built, and feelings were hinted at, but never fully revealed. Picture it. A gentleman enters, hat in hand, gloves perfectly matched, posture so upright it could be used to measure vertical lines. He bows, she curtsies, the chaperone coughs. The dance begins. There is no music, there is no choreography, but make no mistake, this is a dance. A slow, delicate, tea-scented ballet of glances, compliments, and conversational acrobatics. The gentleman sits never too close. The lady pours tea, never too much milk. They speak of safe things, the weather, the garden, the latest scandal involving someone's cousin, and a poorly timed sneeze at church. Every word is measured. Every gesture is calculated. A compliment on her embroidery, acceptable. A compliment on her eyes, scandalous. A compliment on her embroidery while looking at her eyes, dangerous territory. Meanwhile, the chaperone lurks nearby, pretending to read a book, but actually counting how many times the gentleman says charming. 3 is acceptable. 4 is suspicious. The drawing room is filled with traps. Sit too close to the piano. You're bold. Sit too far from the fireplace. You're cold. Choose the wrong biscuit from the tray. You may never marry. And yet, within these constraints, love finds a way. A shared laugh, a mutual appreciation for hydrangeas, a moment when the lady drops her handkerchief and the gentleman retrieves it with the solemnity of a knight returning a sacred relic. This is romance, Victorian style, slow, subtle, supervised, and somehow sweet. So as you drift off tonight, imagine yourself in a drawing room. The fire crackles, the tea steams, the cushions are embroidered with tiny roses. You sit across from someone who makes your heart flutter and you discuss the weather like it's the most thrilling topic in the world. Sleep well. The drawing room awaits, and the biscuits are perfectly arranged. Before texting, before phone calls, before someone could send a heart emoji and call it romance, there were letters. Glorious, handwritten, ink-scented letters, the lifeblood of Victorian courtship, the slow-burning, soul-revealing, paper-bound whispers of love. In the 19th century, letters were everything. They were the emotional outlet for a society that didn't believe in public affection. You couldn't hold hands, you couldn't kiss, you couldn't even say, "I like you," without risking a fainting spell. But you could write it down, carefully, elegantly, with a fountain pen and a heart full of longing. A gentleman might spend hours composing a letter. He'd sit at his desk, surrounded by books and moral restraint, agonizing over every word. Should he say admire or esteem? Should he mention her eyes or stick to her conversational skills? Should he include a poem or risk being labeled dramatic? The paper mattered. Thick, creamy, respectable. The ink mattered. Black, never blue was for rebels. The handwriting mattered. Slanted, graceful, legible. And the seal. Oh, the seal. Wax, pressed with a signet ring, like a romantic stamp of approval. The lady, upon receiving the letter, would retreat to her room. She'd sit by the window, sunlight filtering through lace curtains, and read. Slowly, carefully, possibly twice, possibly 12 times. She'd blush. She'd sigh. She'd wonder if your presence is a balm to my spirit meant he liked her or just admired her posture. And then she'd reply, with equal care, equal restraint, equal emotional gymnastics. She might say, "Your words are most agreeable," which meant I'm swooning but pretending not to. She might include a pressed flower, a subtle signal, a botanical wink. Letters were the secret garden of Victorian romance. In them, lovers could be bold, tender, poetic. They could say what they couldn't say aloud. They could dream, they could hope, they could flirt and paper. But even letters had rules. Too frequent, and you were overeager. Too long, and you were dramatic. Too short, and you were cold. And heaven forbid you smudged the ink. That was practically emotional sabotage. Still, despite the rules, the rituals, the risk of postal delays, and nosy maids love bloomed. Slowly, sweetly, one envelope at a time. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a letter arriving just for you, tied with a ribbon, sealed with care. Inside, words that make your heart flutter. Words written in a time when love was slow, and longing came with lace. Sleep well. The ink is still drying. Victorian romance wasn't just about feelings. It was a full-contact sport of etiquette, a labyrinth of rules, rituals, and social gymnastics so complex it made modern dating look like ordering takeout. Imagine trying to flirt while obeying 47 unspoken rules, 12 published pamphlets, and the constant scrutiny of your aunt's monocle. Welcome to the Etiquette Olympics. The opening ceremony, the introduction. You couldn't just walk up to someone and say hi. That was scandalous. You needed a formal introduction, preferably by someone of equal or higher social standing. Bonus points if the introducer had a title, a powdered wig, or a reputation for matchmaking. Once introduced, you could speak, briefly, about the weather, or the piano recital, or the latest scandal involving someone else's cousin, but never about feelings. Feelings were 4 letters. See Chapter 6, the dress code. Fashion as flirtation clothing was communication. Gloves on, you're polite. Gloves off, you're bold. A fan held to the heart, you're interested. A fan dropped, you're either clumsy or proposing marriage. Ladies wore corsets so tight they couldn't breathe, which conveniently prevented them from saying anything inappropriate. Gentlemen wore cravats so elaborate they needed a map to tie them. Everyone was dressed to impress then to suppress. The seating arrangement, strategic proximity at a dinner party, where you sat mattered. Next to someone, you might be courting. Across from someone, you're observing. Diagonally, you're confused. And if you were seated next to a chaperone, you were doomed. Chairs weren't just furniture, they were emotional battlegrounds. The tea test, grace under pressure afternoon tea, was the ultimate etiquette exam. You had to pour, sip, and converse all while balancing a tiny sandwich and your dignity. Spilled the tea literally. Social death. Stirred too loudly. Barbaric. Eat the cucumber garnish. You're a monster. But if you passed the tea test, you were one step closer to romantic success. The exit strategy. Leaving with style, you couldn't just say bye. You had to take your leave. This involved standing, bowing, possibly quoting poetry, and walking away without tripping over your own dignity. A well-executed exit was like a mic drop in lace gloves. Victorian courtship was a performance, a dance, a game where the rules were invisible and constantly changing. But beneath the layers of etiquette, there was real emotion, real longing, real love expressed through glances, gestures, and the occasional fan flutter. So tonight, as you drift off, imagine yourself at a grand ball. You're dressed to the nines. You've mastered the etiquette. And across the room, someone catches your eye. Just for a moment, just enough. Sleep well. You've won gold in the etiquette Olympics. In the 19th century, emotions were like corsets tightly bound and rarely on display. So how did one express love, longing, or mild romantic panic without uttering a word? Easy, you sent flowers. But not just any flowers. Victorians believed every bloom had a meaning, a secret code, a botanical whisper. It was called floriography, and it turned bouquets into emotional telegrams. The Floral Dictionary. Here's a peek into the petaled poetry of the era. Flower meaning red rose, passionate love, white lily, purity and devotion. Yellow carnation, rejection or disappointment, lavender distrust, yes, really. Forget-me-not, true love and remembrance, daffodil, new beginnings, ivy, fidelity and friendship. Black, rose, tragic love or farewell. So if someone handed you a bouquet of yellow carnations and lavender, they weren't being sweet, they were politely telling you to back off. The art of arrangement, it wasn't just the flowers, it was how they were arranged. Upright meant sincerity. Reversed meant the opposite. Tied with a ribbon, romantic. Tied with twine, you were probably being frightened. Even the number of flowers mattered. 1 rose, love at first sight. 13 roses. You were either very dramatic or apologizing for something big. The secret exchange bouquets were often exchanged in public, but their meanings were private. A gentleman might hand a lady a posy after a dance. She'd glance at it, decode the message, and respond with a subtle smile or a strategic drop into the punch bowl. Sometimes, flowers were left anonymously, on a doorstep, in a book, at a church pew, a silent confession, a fragrant mystery. The floral love letter. Some romantics went further, sending entire floral letters, each flower chosen with care, each meaning layered like a sonnet. It was Shakespeare in stems. Imagine receiving a bouquet of red roses, ivy, and forget-me-not. Translation: I love you, I'll be loyal, and I'll never forget you. Swoon. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a garden blooming with secret messages, petals whispering sweet nothings, vines curling with devotion. And somewhere, someone is picking just the right flower to say what words cannot. Sleep well. The roses are watching. In the grand theatre of Victorian romance, there was always a third wheel. Not a friend, not a sibling, but a chaperone, the human embodiment of not so fast. Chaperones were the silent sentinels of propriety. Their job, to ensure that no one flirted too freely, danced too closely, or accidentally fell in love without permission. Who were these people? Usually older women, widowed aunts, stern governesses, or mothers with a sixth sense for scandal. They wore sensible shoes, carried smelling salts, and had the uncanny ability to appear just as things were getting interesting. They didn't just supervise, they hovered, like moral drones. The rules of engagement: no unchaperoned walks, a stroll in the park, only if Aunt Mildred was 2 steps behind, pretending not to eavesdrop. No closed doors. If you were talking in a parlor, the door stayed open. If it closed, so did your reputation. No prolonged eye contact. 5 seconds was fine. 10 seconds meant you were practically engaged. No letters without review. Some chaperones insisted on reading correspondence. Love, edited by committee. The chaperone's toolkit, the fan snap. A sharp flick of the fan meant, "That's enough, dear." The cough, a polite reminder that someone was watching. The sudden interruption, "Oh, I didn't realize you were alone. Let me just sit here awkwardly and ruin the moment." Chaperones were masters of subtle sabotage. The romance resistance, but lovers were clever. They found ways to communicate under the chaperone's nose. Code words in conversation, secret notes tucked into books, stolen glances across crowded rooms, flower messages, see Chapter 8. It was a game of stealth and strategy, a romantic spy mission. And when a couple finally managed a moment alone, just a few seconds, it was electric, forbidden, glorious. The chaperone's redemption. Not all chaperones were villains. Some were secret romantics. They'd turn a blind eye, pretend to nap, even deliver letters under the table. These were the unsung heroes of Victorian love, the ones who knew that sometimes rules were meant to be bent. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a candlelit ballroom, music playing, lovers exchanging glances, and in the corner, a chaperone sipping tea, pretending not to notice. Sleep well. The watchdogs are dozing. After months of letters, glances, floral codes, and chaperone dodging, it all came down to one moment, the proposal, the ultimate test of courage, timing, and emotional restraint. Because in Victorian times, asking someone to marry you wasn't just romantic, was practically a legal proceeding. The formalities, a gentleman couldn't just drop to one knee and say, "Marry me." That was far too spontaneous. First he had to secure permission from the lady's father or guardian or terrifying grandmother, demonstrate financial stability, a house, an income, and ideally, a family crest, prove moral character in all gambling debts, no scandalous cousins, and preferably no poetry published under a pseudonym. Only then could he proceed to the actual proposal. And even that had rules. The language of proposals, Victorians didn't say, "I love you" lightly. They said things like, "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Might I hope that your affections mirror my own? I find myself quite undone by your presence." Translation: I'm wildly in love, but I'm trying not to faint. The setting: proposals happened in drawing rooms, gardens, or during carriage rides, never in public, never in haste, and never without a chaperone lurking nearby, pretending to admire the wallpaper. The gentleman would stand, the lady would sit, he'd speak, she'd blush, there might be tears, there might be silence, there might be a strategically timed feint. The panic. Despite all the planning, proposals were terrifying. What if she said no? What if her father said no? What if the chaperone said no? Rejection wasn't just personal, it was social. A failed proposal could ruin reputations, friendships, and entire tea parties. But when she said yes, when she accepted with grace and a smile, it was magic. The culmination of months of longing, etiquette, and emotional origami. The aftermath: once engaged, the couple could finally hold hands briefly, in daylight, exchange gifts, lockets, books, embroidered handkerchiefs, plan the wedding with input from every relative within a 50-mile radius, and of course, they could write even more letters, now with phrases like "my dearest" and "yours eternally." So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a quiet garden, moonlight, a trembling voice, a hopeful heart, and the words that change everything. Sleep well. The question has been asked and answered. After the proposal, the planning began, and in the Victorian era, a wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a ceremonial spectacle, a social performance, a lace-covered declaration that two people had successfully navigated the emotional obstacle course of courtship. The preparation parade. Once engaged, the couple entered a whirlwind of planning, but not together. He handled finances, she handled flowers, and everyone else handled opinions. The bride's dress was white, thanks to Queen Victoria, who made it fashionable. It was heavy, ornate, and designed to make walking a challenge. The groom's attire was formal, somber, and slightly less breathable than a coffin. The guest list included family, friends, distant cousins, and anyone who had ever lent someone a teaspoon. And of course, there were chaperones still watching, just in case someone tried to elope mid. The ceremony. Victorian weddings were solemn affairs. No dancing down the aisle, no spontaneous vows, just tradition, formality, and the occasional sniffle. Vows were recited with dignity, no improvisation, no jokes, just to love, honor, and obey. Yes, Victorian feminism was still warming up. Rings were exchanged with trembling hands and silent prayers. Kisses were rare. If they happened, they were brief, discreet, and possibly blocked by a strategically placed bouquet. The reception. After the ceremony came the reception, a genteel gathering of tea, cake, and polite conversation. The cake was a towering masterpiece of sugar and symbolism. Cutting it together was a sign of unity. Eating it without choking was a sign of grace. The dancing was formal, waltzes only. No wild moves, no touching below the elbow. The gifts included silver spoons, embroidered linens, and enough candlesticks to light a cathedral. And somewhere in the corner, the couple would steal a glance, a quiet moment, a shared smile, the beginning of something real. The honeymoon. Victorian honeymoons were often spent visiting relatives or touring the countryside. Romance was implied, but rarely discussed. Privacy was a luxury, and love, true, unguarded love, was just beginning. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a candle-lit ballroom, a bride in white, a groom in awe, and a waltz that carries them into forever. Sleep well. The story has just begun. The wedding is over. The guests have gone. The cake crumbs have settled, and the couple, once strangers navigating the maze of etiquette, are now partners in the quiet, unfolding adventure of marriage. But Victorian love didn't end at I do. It simply changed form, from courtship to companionship, from longing to laughter, from fan flutters to shared teacups. The domestic dream. Marriage in the 19th century was both romantic and practical. The couple built a home filled with books, portraits, and the occasional taxidermy fox. They hosted dinners. They wrote letters to relatives. They argued about wallpaper. But beneath the routines, there was tenderness. A glance across the breakfast table. A hand on the shoulder during a storm. A shared smile when the baby finally slept. Love became quieter, deeper, less about rules, more about rhythm. The letters never stopped, even in marriage. They wrote to each other. When apart, when traveling, when words felt easier on paper than aloud. I miss your voice in the morning. The garden is blooming, but not as brightly as when you're here. I remain, as ever, yours. These letters were the heartbeat of their bond. Proof that romance didn't fade, it simply matured. The passage of time, years passed. Children arrived, hair grayed, corsets loosened, but the love remained woven into routines, rituals, and the quiet comfort of knowing someone truly sees you. They still danced, sometimes, in the parlor, in the garden, in memory. They still gave flowers, not for meaning, but for joy. They still held hands, not for propriety, but for peace. The legacy. Victorian love, for all its rules and restraint, was never just about courtship. It was about connection, about finding someone who understood your silences, who read your letters, who stood beside you when the world changed. And that kind of love, whether in lace or denim, candlelight or lead glow, never goes out of style. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine two rocking chairs, side by side, a breeze through the curtains, a letter tucked in a drawer, and a love that lasted. Sleep well. The story may end here, but the heart keeps writing. Imagine if our lace-clad lovers were suddenly dropped into the 21st century. No carriages, no crosses, just smartphones, social media, and the terrifying concept of ghosting. How would Victorian romance survive? Surprisingly well, if you add a little imagination and a lot of etiquette. The modern letter, texting with grace. Victorians would treat texting like letter writing, thoughtful, poetic, possibly over-punctuated. Instead of "you up," they'd write, "Dearest, I hope this message finds you in gentle repose. Might I inquire as to your wakefulness?" Instead of "LOL," they'd say, "Your wit is a balm to my weary spirit." And they'd use them sparingly, like wax seals. A single could mean "I burn with affection." I might say "Peace be upon our hearts." The selfie situation. Victorians didn't have selfies, they had portrait sittings. Hours of posing, perfect lighting, and zero smiling. In today's world, they'd embrace filters with caution. No duck faces, no mirror pics, just tasteful sepia tones and captions like, "A modest reflection of Tuesday's melancholy. My countenance post-tea." The dating app dilemma. Swipe culture would horrify them, but they'd adapt. Profiles would read like personal ads from a Jane Austen novel. Gentleman of steady income and poetic leanings, seeks partner for long walks and existential musings. Lady of botanical interests and strong opinions, desires meaningful correspondence and shared glances. No shirtless gym pics, no vague bios, just sincerity and a touch of drama. The courtship calendar Victorian lovers would still insist on structure. Modern activity, Victorian equivalent. First date at a cafe, afternoon tea with chaperone, Netflix and chill, reading poetry by candlelight. Instagram story, reply handwritten note, with pressed flower voice memo, dramatic soliloquy via voicemail they'd bring back. Slow love, the kind that simmers, that builds, that doesn't rely on algorithms. The enduring truth, even in a world of screens and swipes. The heart wants what it's always wanted, to be seen, understood, and adored. Whether through ink or pixels, love finds a way. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a Victorian soul navigating Tinder, swiping left on scandal, right on sincerity, and somewhere, across time and technology, two hearts still find each other. Sleep well. Romance is timeless even with Wi-Fi. In the Victorian world, tea wasn't just a beverage, it was a ritual, a social glue, a moment of pause in a life ruled by propriety and petticoats. And for lovers, it was one of the few times they could sit together, speak softly, and let the steam rise between them like a shared secret. The art of the pour tea was serious business. The host, usually the lady of the house, poured with precision. Milk first or after, a debate that could end friendships. Sugar, 1 cube, meant politeness, 2 meant flirtation, 3 meant reckless abandon. The way one stirred their tea said everything. Clockwise.com and composed. Counterclockwise, rebellious and possibly poetic. No stirring, either deeply in love or deeply distracted. The teacup tango holding a teacup was a performance. Pinky out, only if you were showing off. Cup too high, you were nervous. Cup too low, you were bored. And if you clinked your spoon too loudly, you were clearly raised by wolves. But the real magic happened in the conversation. Tea time was when lovers could speak in metaphors, exchange glances, and hide compliments in commentary about biscuits. This shortbread is delightful equals I adore you. The weather is quite mild equals I wish we were alone. Would you care for another cup? Equals please don't leave yet. The tea leaf reading, some believed that after the last sip, the leaves at the bottom of the cup could reveal one's future. A heart shape, romance, a ring, marriage, a broken line, a meddling chaperone. Lovers might read each other's cups, pretending not to hope, pretending not to see the tiny leaf that looked suspiciously like a rose. The unspoken tea was the great equalizer. It softened the edges of formality. It allowed for laughter, for vulnerability, for the kind of quiet intimacy that didn't need declarations. In that moment, 2 hands around porcelain, 2 hearts leaning closer, love steeped slowly, sweetly, like the perfect brew. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a cozy parlor, rain tapping the windows, a kettle whistling, and someone across from you, smiling over a cup, saying everything without saying a word. Sleep well. The tea is still warm. Not every love story ends in a proposal. Not every feeling finds its voice. And in the quiet corners of Victorian life, many hearts beat for someone who never knew. They wrote letters, beautiful, aching, unsent letters, tucked into drawers, hidden in books, burned in fireplaces. Not because the love wasn't real, but because the world wasn't ready. The unwritten rules of unsent letters. Victorians were masters of restraint. If a love was forbidden by class, by circumstance, by fear, they didn't confess it. They documented it. I dare not speak, so I write. If only you knew how often your name finds my pen. I remain yours, though you'll never read these words. These letters were never meant to be delivered. They were meant to preserve a feeling, to honor it, to give it form, even if it couldn't have a future. The anatomy of a hidden heart, an unsent letter, often began with hesitation. My dearest, though, I have no right to call you that. It would unfold with longing. Your laughter lingers in my memory like sunlight on lace, and end with silence. I shall never send this, but I shall never forget you. Some were written after a single glance, some after years of friendship, some after a goodbye that felt too final. The fate of the letters they were, folded carefully and placed in locked boxes, pressed between pages of poetry or prayer books, burned in moments of courage or heartbreak, lost in attics, only to be found decades later, proof that someone once loved deeply and quietly. And sometimes they were kept, reread, memorized, because even if the love couldn't be shared, it could still be cherished. The quiet legacy unsent letters are the ghosts of romance. They haunt gently. They remind us that love doesn't need to be loud to be real. That sometimes the bravest thing is to feel without demanding to be felt in return. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a desk by candlelight, a hand trembling over parchment, words spilling like secrets, and a heart that loved enough to write but not to send. Sleep well. Some letters live forever, even unread. Victorian love didn't always end with a wedding. Sometimes it ended with silence, with distance, with a final letter and a pressed flower left behind. But even when the lovers parted, something lingered. Love, once felt deeply, leaves traces, in rooms, in objects, in memory. These are the ghosts of old love, not frightening but tender, not haunting but quietly present. The haunted parlor, a room where two people once sat, side by side, sipping tea and sharing glances. Years later, the furniture remains. The wallpaper fades, but the air still hums with something unsaid. Visitors feel it. A hush, a warmth, a sense that someone once loved here. The book with a secret, a volume of poetry, long untouched, falls open to a page with a dried violet. No note, no name, just a flower that meant faithfulness. Someone once read that poem with someone in mind, someone who never knew. The forgotten keepsake, a locket in a drawer. Inside, a miniature portrait. No inscription, but the eyes in the painting are unmistakably full of longing. It was worn close to the heart, then hidden, then found. A relic of a love that dared not speak. The clock that stopped. Some say when a heart breaks, time stands still. In one home, a mantel clock stopped the day she left. No one restarted it. Not out of neglect but reverence. It became a monument, a quiet witness to the moment love changed form. The memory in the mirror. Victorians believed mirrors could hold memories, that if you looked long enough, you might see someone who once stood there, adjusting a cravat, smoothing a gown, hoping to be seen. And sometimes, you do, not with your eyes but with your heart. These ghosts aren't here to frighten, they're here to remind that love, once real, never truly disappears. It settles into the fabric of life, into the corners, into the quiet. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a house filled with whispers, a garden blooming with memory, a letter tucked beneath a floorboard, and the gentle truth that love outlasts time. Sleep well. The ghosts are watching, but only with kindness. In the Victorian era, silence wasn't empty, it was intentional. A pause could be powerful. A glance could be a confession. A moment of stillness could carry more meaning than 1,000 sonnets. They lived in a world where words were rationed, emotions were veiled, and propriety was the ever-watchful gatekeeper. So they became fluent in a language few could hear, but many could feel, the language of silence. The glance that lingered, eye contact, was rare, and therefore sacred. A look held for just a second too long could say, "I see you. I remember. I wish things were different." In a crowded room, two lovers might exchange a glance across the floor, brief, electric, and utterly forbidden. That glance was a love letter with no envelope. The gesture of grace, a dropped glove, a handkerchief folded just so, a fan fluttered at the right moment. These were not accidents, they were messages. A glove left behind equals think of me. A fan held to the lips equals I cannot speak, but I feel. A handkerchief embroidered with initials equals you are not forgotten. Even the way one stood rigid or relaxed could reveal the state of the heart. The silence between words. In conversation, pauses were potent. A hesitation before answering, a breath before responding. These silences were filled with meaning. I want to say more, but I shouldn't. I'm afraid of what you'll think. I hope you understand without me saying it. Victorians were masters of the unsaid. They trusted that true connection didn't always need sound. The shared stillness. Sometimes, lovers sat together without speaking, just being, just breathing. The silence wasn't awkward, it was intimate. In that quiet, they said, "I feel safe with you. We don't need words. This moment is enough." It was the kind of silence that wrapped around the heart like a warm shawl. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a candlelit room, 2 chairs, 2 souls, no words, just glances, gestures, and the kind of silence that speaks volumes. Sleep well. The quiet is full of love. In the Victorian era, love was rarely immediate. It was a slow bloom, a quiet unfolding, a delicate ritual of patience and restraint. And at the heart of it all was waiting. Waiting for a letter, waiting for a glance, waiting for permission, waiting for the right moment to say what had been felt for months, perhaps years. Victorian lovers didn't rush. They lingered, they hoped, they waited, waiting for the post. The mail was a lifeline. A letter could take days, even weeks, and yet they waited. Every morning, hearts fluttered at the sound of hooves or footsteps. Would today bring a reply, a word, a sign? And when it didn't, they waited again, with grace, with longing, with the quiet ache of devotion. Waiting in the parlor, a gentleman might call at 3 o'clock. The lady would be ready by 2:45, sitting, composed, pretending to read, listening for the knock. Every tick of the clock was a heartbeat. Every creak of the floorboards was a possibility. And when he arrived on time, of course it was as if the world exhaled. Waiting for approval, love wasn't just between two people. It was between families, reputations, fortunes. A couple might wait months for a father's blessing, for a dowry to be settled, for a scandal to fade. They waited, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. And in that waiting, their love grew stronger, more certain, more sacred. Waiting in silence, sometimes they waited without knowing if the other felt the same. A glance returned, a letter unanswered, a visit postponed. But still they waited, because hope was its own kind of love, because longing was proof of feeling, because patience was the purest form of devotion. Victorian romance teaches us that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives slowly, softly, after days of silence, after weeks of wondering, after months of waiting. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine a quiet room, a letter on the desk, a heart full of hope, and the gentle truth that some things are worth waiting for. Sleep well. Love is never late, it's just deliberate. In the world of Victorian romance, touch was not casual, it was ceremonial. A single brush of fingers could carry more meaning than 1,000 words. And when it finally happened, after weeks of glances, letters, and longing, it was nothing short of sacred. The prelude, before the touch, there was tension, a shared silence, a glance held a second too long, a hand offered not grabbed, not demanded but offered. Perhaps it was to help her into a carriage. Perhaps it was to steady her as she stepped over a puddle. Perhaps it was nothing more than a gloved hand resting beside hers on a table. But it was everything. The moment skin met skin, or glove met glove, and in that instant, the world narrowed. Time paused, breath caught. It wasn't about passion, it was about permission. It wasn't about possession, it was about presence. The first touch said, "I see you, I respect you, I've waited for this." The aftermath, after the touch, nothing was the same. The memory of it lingered like perfume. The warmth of it stayed long after the hand was withdrawn. The meaning of it echoed in every heartbeat. Victorian lovers didn't need to kiss to feel close. They didn't need to embrace to feel known. One touch, one honest, intentional touch, was enough to change everything. So tonight, imagine two hands reaching across time, not to grasp, not to take, but to say, "I'm here, and I've been waiting." Because sometimes, the most powerful love stories begin not with a kiss but with a touch. In the Victorian world, where words were measured and touch was rare, the eyes became the most eloquent messengers of love. They spoke in glances, in flickers, in long lingering looks that carried entire sonnets within them. To meet someone's gaze was not a casual act, it was a confession. The first look, it often began across a ballroom. A gentleman standing near the punch bowl, a lady seated beside a fern. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, something shifted. No words, no gestures, just a glance that said, "I noticed you, I admire you, I wonder if you feel the same." The rules of looking Victorian etiquette dictated everything, even how long one could look. 1 second, polite interest. 2 seconds, mild flirtation. 3 seconds, scandalous. For seconds, you were practically engaged. To look too long was bold, to look too little was cold. The balance was delicate, and every glance was a gamble. The eyes, as letters' eyes, could ask questions. Will you write to me? Will you walk with me? Will you wait for me? They could offer comfort. I understand. I forgive. I'm still here. They could express longing, joy, sorrow, and devotional without a single syllable. And when two lovers truly saw each other, when their eyes met and held, it was as if the rest of the world faded. The chaperones, the rules, the expectations, all gone. Just two souls, speaking in silence. The final glance sometimes, the last look, said more than any farewell. A glance from a carriage window. I look across a crowded train platform. Eyes that said, I'll remember, I'll write, I'll love you, even if I never see you again. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, close your eyes and imagine another pair meeting yours. Soft, steady, full of meaning. Because in the end, the eyes were the truest poets of Victorian love. Sleep well. The story is complete, but the gaze lingers. And so, dear dreamer, our journey through lace and longing comes to a close. We've wandered through drawing rooms and garden paths. We've read letters sealed with wax and hearts. We've watched lovers glance, wait, touch, and hope, always with restraint, always with reverence. We've met chaperones with eagle eyes, bouquets that spoke in code, and teacups that trembled with emotion. We've seen how silence could sing, how patience could bloom, and how a single look could carry a lifetime of feeling. Victorian love was never rushed. It was a slow dance, a whispered promise, a candle flickering in the quiet. And though the corsets have loosened and the carriages have rolled away, something remains. A tenderness, a truth, a reminder that real love is timeless. So as you lay your head down tonight, let the echoes of this story wrap around you like a velvet shawl. Let the glances, the letters, the touches, and the sighs settle gently into your dreams. You are in the parlor now. The fire is low, the tea has cooled, and someone, somewhere, is still waiting to write you a letter. And if this tale of corsets and courtship made your heart flutter just a little, don't forget to like, because even Victorian ghosts appreciate a good thumbs up, and subscribe so you never miss another midnight carriage ride into romance. It's the modern equivalent of sending a love letter sealed with wax. Sleep softly, sleep sweetly, sleep in the arms of a story that never truly ends. Good night.